We slip, dance around the fire, it's a new moon. And you showed me how lovely that this world.
Welcome back into the cool, everybody. And while everybody's still fiddling around out there, I'll introduce our panel and introduce, obviously, what today. You've already heard what today is about very much from, and this is why, in all the choices of houses that we had, what a fabulous opportunity to choose a house to discuss the issue, one of the big issues that's been coming up in all our consultation about the impact of COVID on women and girls. The issue of housing and homelessness and housing insecurity has come up time and time again, particularly that whole issue for older women. And I have to say, Jane Caro did this amazing keynote speech for us on Friday night for the first part of the DomestiCITY weekend. And she gave me another statistic that I had never heard, which is that 34% of single women in Australia are living in poverty by the age of 60. 34%. And if that's not bad enough, by pension age, this rises to 50%. 50% of single women in Australia living in poverty. And as Jane says, why are we not talking about this? Why are we not doing something about it? Well, as it says in your introduction, actually, we started to do something about it when COVID hit. We suddenly saw that, yes, there could be solutions. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today with this amazing panel. All right, let me introduce you to the team today. To facilitate the conversation, Professor Ingrid Burkett, co-director of the Yunus Centre at Griffith University, and someone who has inspired and informed me much in my work and thinking for the last decade. Ingrid is an international specialist in social innovation, community economic development and finance, and one of her passions is this space, housing and homelessness. Kate Rose is actually a digital and data specialist, and I didn't know this, and an expert in loyalty programs and e-commerce, but we know her through WOW for her work over the last 7 years with QSuper, and in particular through the conversations she had with us for WOW Global 24 and her passion for understanding the issues for women and retirement. And then finally, we have, certainly last but not least, social worker and advocate Gail Middleton, works at Sundale, the non-profit aged care service provider on the Sunshine Coast, as their housing and community engagement manager, and is the lead architect of Better Together Housing, which she will talk about, I'm sure, at some point today. We also have a couple of special guests who are going to respond to join in the conversation. Former Lord Mayor Sally-Anne Atkinson, Lord Mayor of Brisbane, should I say? Sally-Anne Atkinson, I welcome you here today. And impact investor Lisa Siganto, one of our big supporters, and also passionate about doing something, as I think the whole family are, in relation to the housing and homelessness space. I'd also like to...
I have to say, I'm here really as a Zonta.
And you're here as a Zonta person, that's right, and that's what you're going to, because Zonta has been doing some great work in this area as well. I'd also like to acknowledge Lou Batsina, Artistic Director of the Brisbane Festival, who is here with us today. Thank you so much in this amazing time for everything that you've done to take the time out to come to our little soiree. Thank you. So, over to you, Ingrid.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kathy. And can I just say thank you so much to Gaja Kerry. Thank you so much for your welcome to country. I think it's amazing that we are welcomed to country in order to talk about this topic, home, because land is home. So thank you so much. And thank you to the household who has invited us here today. It was great to hear your story in words and song. And it's a fantastic place, I think, to have a conversation about something that is clearly really important in the current context, has become even more important as we face what is the future post-pandemic. So I just want to, I'm going to be grilling my two new friends here on the panel and also our special guests, and I'd invite you to join our conversation. There are so many people here with such rich experiences. We'd love to hear from you as part of this conversation. I just want to, this is an unusual sound nowadays, isn't it? So we should appreciate it. I want to add a couple of statistics to those that Kathy shared with us, just as a bit of a framing. There's a report that came out only last month from HAG, the Housing
Action Group.
Aged Action Group in Victoria, and their new research has actually counted how many women are currently at risk of homelessness, and particularly those women over 65. They've reduced that age right down to 45, and what they've been telling us now is that there's about 400,000 women at imminent risk of homelessness over the age of 45 in Australia. And to add to that statistic that Kathy shared about poverty, there's women aged 55 to 64, over 1/4 of them who are in private rental are currently at risk of homelessness. So that's a stunning and shocking statistic for us to think about. That risk increases to 65% if the women are unemployed, which currently should shock us all given the rate of unemployment and the precarity of employment as we look towards the future. Women don't face, if we think of homelessness, oftentimes the first image that comes to mind is rough sleeping. We're not talking about that kind of homelessness when we're talking about being at risk of homelessness. We're talking about couch hopping. So if you're younger, it's couch surfing. If you're older, it's couch hopping. There's a high percentage of people who are house sitting, who are actually technically homeless. So it's a different kind. And to get that picture into our head, I think, is a really important thing as we start to talk about this space. My own personal background is I live on a property where we share 25 beautiful acres with 20 adults and 6 children. We've just gone through a 5-year planning process, so we're entirely legal now. Maybe I shouldn't say that on film. So I'm passionate about thinking outside the box to make housing, and not just housing, it's not bricks and mortar, homes accessible to people who otherwise would not be able to afford to have a permanent, secure home. In my previous position as a director of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, we were lucky enough to get some philanthropic money to look at the future of ageing. And as we spent time with many, many older people, sometimes it can be derogatory to call people baby boomers, but mostly they identified themselves as baby boomers, and looked at what their future felt like for them. And the single most important thing that came up was a fear around the security of their homes, and a realisation that every one of them was on a roulette wheel that could involve a risk of homelessness, even if they owned their own homes, because of the precarity of their incomes. So that made me even more passionate that we need to start thinking outside the box around what is the future of homes and homelessness and houselessness. So I would love to start with a question to you, Gail, because you've done an extraordinary amount of work in this space, and you, like I, have heard many stories of what that actually means. Would you be able to share one of those stories with us to help ground some of those statistics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am very passionate about this area. I've been an advocate for many years in both housing and income security. So when I moved up to the Sunshine Coast and started working in aged care, there was a complete nexus of housing insecurity became really apparent. In this aged care sundial, they had actually invested into some affordable housing projects. Many of you might have heard of the NRAS. And but what we knew, the numbers were growing and we had to do more. And like with good community workers, we all started to collaborate and we came together. And of course, there were lots of solutions that people started saying, but the main ones were, the government needs to put more investment into affordable housing, pensions need to increase. And, because I'm getting older, I kind of thought, well, I've been harping on about that for 30, 40 years, and we still haven't got there. So I'm not denying that isn't required, but we have to come up with some other solution. So we started talking about shared housing, and we got together and we actually got a state grant to actually develop this part of shared housing, which I'll talk to you about later. But it's really important as well and I'm hoping everyone's familiar with the term co-design, which is where we needed to get some older women involved in this housing. Otherwise, it was, we could be experts and come up and say what you want, but we got some women involved. And because I've been working with this NRAS property, Trish, who I'd come to be very fond of. And she became our pin-up girl, really. She liked to tell her story, so I'm just repeating her story. So she's in her 80s. She looks like she's in her 60s. And her mind is as sharp as if she's in her 40s. She knows what's going on and she's very, very worried. She was ahead of her time. She was educated as a young woman. She was a school teacher. She was a mother of 3 children. She progressed her career to the extent of being a principal. But like many other women, she divorced. And when she divorced, she got the children and she was responsible for caring for those children, and she did. But she worked in a feminised industry where she earned less than her male counterparts. And so her male counterparts were investing into this new thing called a superannuation or whatever they were called in those days. But she needed the money just to be able to support her children. And she did, and she's got a lovely family and she's still very close to them, but she's still an independent woman. And so Trish then retired, like we all like to do or think that we're going to do. And she had travelled well and she had lots of friends. She was very, very, very artistic. But she was starting to worry about how was she going to pay her rent. She had moved by this time to the hinterland in the Sunshine Coast. And she talks about how she had, I think it's 12 houses in 10 years. Because she would be moving from house to house to house. And they would be broken houses, they would be small houses on her own, they would be collective kind of houses. She loves talking about the old Queenslander they had. They were all a bit arty, and so I could imagine them being like a bit like here, where they just would constantly fix it a bit. But eventually the roof started to leak, it became a hazard, and the owner just decided to let them all go. The house is still empty. It's still there, but it's empty. So rather than fix the roof, they all moved out. So eventually she got, her name came up on the list for state housing, and, and as she says, be careful what you wish for. Because she got a house, she got a roof over her head. Yes, it was secure. It was nowhere near her friends. She had no outside space. She didn't feel safe in that community because she wasn't connected. That wasn't her people. She got depressed. The house was dark. And she was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And so eventually she heard about the NRAS, and eventually her name came and that's how she found her way to us. And but now her new worry is, like many government programs, NRAS has come to an end. I mean, we all know that NRAS is a financial solution, or not necessarily in that same form, but in a form. There are other ways. That was to get mum and dad investors involved. But that's coming to an end, and Tricia's rent, she believes, is going to increase by 20% come September 2022. And so she's become part of the Better Together housing, and she's still working tirelessly to help find solutions and help shape what it is. So that's Tricia's story, and I think the big thing from there is Trish is clever, she's a planner, she's very responsible. So while she's never been homeless, she's been living in fear of housing security for a long time, and she doesn't know where she's going to be when she does start needing more support services. My other takeaway from that is whilst I think governments need to invest, we need to be part of the solution, because what a government solution might not be what we actually need. And so we've got to own that, and we've got to shape that.
So I think the National Rental Affordability scheme, which is NRAS, is one of those examples of we thought it was going to be a silver bullet in a lot of ways, a way to roll out lots of housing. It is coming to an end. So what I really appreciate about what you're saying, Gail, is the need for not more silver bullets, but distributed ways in which we can start to think differently and innovatively.
Or after NRAS, because NRAS is it comes to an end in a funny way. So if somebody is invested in an NRAS property, they get 10 years of these incentives. So they're starting to come to an end already. So it's going to come to an end. And what they never thought of is when they pulled them, and maybe it wasn't the best designed program, but when they pulled it away, they never looked for life after NRAS. And there have been so many other solutions to that kind of investment.
Yeah. Great. So, Kate, can I bring you into the discussion? Because the other, thing that we thought was going to really shift things was superannuation. And you've been involved in superannuation for a long time. You spend a lot of time giving women advice. What are you hearing and seeing that could help add to our conversation this morning?
Yes, thank you. And as they said, I am from QSuper. The views I'm talking about today are my own. I think one of the things that makes super so dynamic is there's diverse views and diverse opinions across the industry. And any advice I give today is of a general nature. But starting with that. Yeah, so when the idea to talk about super in the context of homelessness first came up, I looked at some of the visions of what the separate industries have. And the Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that humans should have an adequate standard of living. It's a fundamental human right. And if we look at what the vision for superannuation is it for people to be able to live with dignity in retirement. And having a safe and secure home is absolutely fundamental to that. So these two issues are quite connected. When we're looking at the success or otherwise of superannuation, especially to do with women, it's been described as a wicked problem. And if we look at homelessness, that description also is applicable. Because what the hallmarks of a wicked problem is, it's not just one thing that's broken. The type of issues that are giving women basically 50% less superannuation when they retire as men is multiple issues. Everything from the number one issue probably that affects women's balances more than men, it's time out of the workforce. Superannuation is earnings linked. The gender pay gap also exacerbates the problem. And women have a much higher likelihood of part-time work. The issues with that is if you have part-time work under $450, it doesn't attract any superannuation. So all of a sudden, if you're only affected by one element here, you have a slight decrease in your super. But if you have multiple effects, then you look at your balance that's incredibly low. I think if we're looking at the older women in the market, while the average is women have 50% less, about 40% of women over 60 have zero superannuation. Okay, so these are elements that we really have to address. As far as homelessness go also, it's about being single or living alone. It's about being in the rental market. It's about having no savings or being at economic disadvantage. It's about family or domestic violence, meaning that you've basically left your home or left the partnership, and often women don't want to fight for what's theirs. So whether you're fighting for the house or you're fighting for superannuation, if it's been very acrimonious, women are quite happy just to walk away. We are taking steps in superannuation to make getting access to superannuation and making the split of super easier. But again, that's one of the policies that's going through at the moment. One thing that I'm really fascinated in superannuation and homelessness is around the behaviour and the emotions, because superannuation is given to us as almost a mathematical probability. And it's very much designed for men's working lives. If you work for 40 years, you take no breaks, you earn a good wage, and you're earning 100% in the dollar compared to women who are earning between 80 and 60 cents, then superannuation works quite effectively. But what we don't talk about is that the emotional problems around math and superannuation. A lot of people find thinking about money very difficult. It's scary. We don't want to be thinking, I don't have enough. And when we get into a position where we don't have enough and we're looking at these really scary problems, it's like, I feel so alone. I don't want to talk about this. And a lot of people, both homeless women and women with no superannuation or no income, think, I'm the only one. And what's so powerful about these conversations is that they lift the lid on the issue and they make women see that they're not alone, that there are services out there, and that there is hope out there, and there are lots of steps women can take to improve both their superannuation. My one bit of advice is start taking some action today, and if that's just educating yourselves and just sitting with the problem and just acknowledging that you're not alone and there are people out there and there are solutions out there that can make a positive difference.
Thank you, Kate. And I think you took us down into the depths there for a moment. I got stuck on that statistic about how many women don't have superannuation, which is truly scary. But you've taken us back into the solution space, and I think, thinking around the diversity of solutions that we need, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Gail, around what you've been doing with Better Together housing and how that could represent one solution. We hear about, solutions that get put into this silver bullet space of, if everybody has a tiny house, if everybody does this, that and the other. So this is one solution, but I think it raises some really interesting thoughts around housing as more than bricks and mortar.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, thanks, but when we started working with people, we realised that as I said, we're not going to get more houses quickly enough. We're not going to get more income quickly enough. So we started looking at shared housing. And what does shared housing look like? And is it sharing with one other? Is it sharing with 5 others? And there's all those kinds of issues that we started to explore. We also recognised that a lot of the women that we were working with were lonely. And another factor that was coming up is most people, when they start to get older, their health starts to deteriorate and they start needing a little bit of extra care. Now, we're not talking about nursing and supporting each other as nursing each other, but just some of that informal care. And one of the things that one woman said when she first joined the program, it was like, I just want to be able to get up in the morning and say to somebody, do you want a cup of tea, love? Without having to have made an appointment and put your lipstick on and gone out, just to do it in your dressing gown. And she was living in one of those, what would have really been a holiday unit somewhere on the Sunshine Coast, and it was damp, and it was one that was no longer suitable for tourists, but it was suitable for women living on their own. Anyway, so we came together and we decided that we'd look at shared housing, and what would we look at? And it was kind of like Tinder, for women, that they could actually come on and they can start looking at meeting other women through a whole through the website, through a Facebook page or whatever. The idea is we knew that this could be some nervousness around, sharing with strangers. So the initial idea was that we would start training our in-home care workers to go in around building relationships, just to go in and check, that they were okay. But our Trish didn't like that. She was so independent. She said, if we want people coming in telling us how to build relationships, we can go nowhere to go. So we didn't go down that line, but we did start realising that, so I suppose the best way to describe Better Together is it's flatmates.com. It's simple, but it's free. It's only for women over 55, and every woman who joins has to have a clean police check. Now, the social worker in me has come across women that have had sexually transmitted debt or something along those lines, so they don't necessarily have a clean police check. We just need to refer them on because we're not doing it about ourselves. It's not a welfare service. It's not a support service. It's just a portal for women to find each other. We also support the notion that women don't share with friends because we recognise that, no matter what household you live in, you're going to have your bad days, when someone's really pissing you off, well, you then need a friend to be able to go and say, pull your head in, get over it, whatever. So people who have lived with friends often, especially if their friendship group has shrunk, if they move in with friends and then they fall out, well, then that's it. Then they get really quite lonely or quite destitute. And then they go to that notion that I've heard many of our women talk. We've only got about 50 women that have gone through the whole process of getting their police checks and filling in and registering. We've got a whole lot of women who are a little bit nervous about it. And we've looked at some of the barriers that these women have. Some of it is they're frightened to give up what they have got. And, some of them are literally hoping they're not going to live for many more years. And that is really sad because they know that they can subsidise their pensions, their rent with their savings they have. But yes, I've lost my train of thought there, so I get quite emotional sometimes when we hear some of the stories. But it is really simply a platform.
Yep. And it is. I mean, home is an emotional issue, isn't it? I think it's natural that we all should get emotional when we're talking about home because, as we found in our work, it's not just an asset. It's also a gateway to the world and a way that the world can come into you, and it's an expression of who you are and who you want to be and who you are as a person with potential, no matter whether you're young or old. So it is an emotional topic. Can I bring in Sally Ann, because your involvement with Zonta, Sally Ann, and Zonta has had a connection to Better Together. Can you tell us a little bit about what does an organisation like Zonta add to this discussion?
Well, quite a lot, one would hope. Sorry, but I've got my back to you, it's all very rude. Zonta, for those who don't know, is a global organisation. Its members are women. It's in 63 countries. About 300,000 women are Zontans. And I'm here today with my good friend and colleague, Sandra McLean, who is the chairman of our communications subcommittee, and she and I are 2/3 of the advocacy committee. Homelessness is one of our big issues, as is domestic violence and education, but today we're talking about homelessness. And Zonta really is about empowering women and girls and human rights. And I guess if I had to sum it up, we'd say human rights for women and girls. Fellas need the human rights as well, but that's what we're on about. And we believe that one of the most basic human rights is to have a home. Not even just a house, to have a home. And so that's really what we're on about. And I'm really sad that my daughter Eloise, who's chairman of the Brisbane Housing Company, is in Adelaide at the moment. I hope she gets back, but anyhow. She's celebrating her 25th wedding anniversary, but the Brisbane Housing Company is working with Zonta. Zonta, and Eloise is an architect, and she's done some designs of shared housing. So we're all in this space together, really. One of the important things that we're doing at the moment is that we have written to every candidate for the state election, to ask them for their views. Have we had many replies?
I'm not sure yet. We've only just done it last week.
We've only just done it, all right. But we really believe that the homelessness of women and domestic violence, which really fits into that in many ways, or perhaps causes it, should be a major platform for every political party. So we are pushing that. There are some alarming figures about the number of people who are waiting for houses. Some alarming figures about, I think, Gail's really touched on those. But so Zonta's very keen to do what we can, and we are doing what we can. And Sandra, if you want to add anything to that, I'd be very happy if you do.
Look, I guess it's the only thing about that I'd like to add is that we're very interested in working with other people. So we can't do it on our own. Obviously, there's a whole lot going on in lots of different areas. But one of the key things we did this year was to galvanise the Zonta clubs around South East Queensland in our district area. So there's 13 Zonta clubs in this district. So we've actually, for the very first time, got them involved in a joint project. I know that sounds strange that people have not done a joint project before, but they have. So we've actually managed to get 13 clubs involved in what we call the housing project, and they've also reached out to some of our clubs across the state, and that's why
up your way.
and also in Bowen we actually sometimes you sort of you talk about this and you never see a result, but we do know that now we've managed to rehouse an 80-year-old woman in Bowen who was basically on the verge of homelessness, and like to think that you're 80 and on the verge of homelessness is like, it's hard to imagine. You don't need that in your life at that point in your life. So I think, what we want to do is to see some results. So, we know the bad news, we know what's going on. So I think it would be really good to find out, to take action. What action, and that's in the correspondence that we've had with the candidates. We've asked for action. We've asked, there needs to be we'd like a hotline. Where do people go? Like, how do you find out what do I do? Like you're talking about raising the profile and people understanding you're not there on your own. It's key, So instead of just saying, homelessness is a terrible issue, this is what we want you to do. So I think, if you could be really directional and asking people directly, this is what, we want you to do, I think is perhaps good. And then the other project that Eloise is working on is another, a bit of a side project for Zonta about some new ideas around how to house women, and it's about enabling women to have an investment, and it's not the silver bullet. It's probably just a part of a problem, but it is around having that investment in a shared property, like this house here today. So how do we create a model that you can replicate easily? Because I think that's the thing. Like, you have a model that you can do again and again. So how do we get that cookie cutter model that perhaps you can roll out to take away some of those terrible stats? So,
which also does, of course, require working with planning authorities and local governments and getting governments on board. I think one of the other issues too that is really important is raising awareness. I reckon if you went out and talked to your friends, people would say, "Oh, is that a problem?" unless they know about it.
So that's an interesting point. I want to come back to you, Gail, because you've raised the idea of housing as a right. And Gail, you've done a lot of work around advocacy. Could you talk to us a little bit about what you think, about this idea of housing as a right? Because I know in the UK, for example, there is the right to housing.
And it's a recognised right.
It's a recognised right.
Yes. I was thinking about this, and I was talking to my partner who's also been around this area for a long time too, and I asked, we're having a discussion about, should we have a right to housing? Well, other than the UN Convention, we don't have a right for housing, but more so, we don't tolerate homelessness either. So our police can actually move homeless people on. So we haven't given the solution from a systemic point of view, but we are actually, moving people on because they are homeless. And again, the other thing I think we have to say when we're talking about a right to housing, we also, in Trisha's words, we have to be careful what we wish for, because it's not a tick box. We don't want to start putting people and building towers of housing properties.
So I'd like to come back too, because you've raised the tangible, the bricks and mortar plus the supports, and Sandra, you raised this idea of investment, and I know we have Lisa Saganto here as well in the audience. And your area of interest and your expertise is in impact investment. Surely, investment that brings together the bricks and mortar and the impact that we want to create is a really important dimension of this topic. What's your views?
Very well said. I'll just start with what impact investing is, and surprisingly, women get this. Impact investing means that you are investing in something with a good financial return, but you're taking into account the social outcomes and the environmental outcomes. There's a big wave of impact investing coming through. Super companies are investing in funds that are impact investment orientated. But just stepping back a bit, or before I do, so there is potential to get this money into the system. It's up to us to work out how we're going to get it in the system, and the current system is not getting it in. There's a lot of money going into disability accommodation, which is fantastic, but that's because it's a government thing and they've made money available. But it's up to us to work out. And I've loved how you've gone through the myths of, what people are thinking about, homeless women. It's you or I or any of us. We haven't been to a Centrelink before. We don't really want to be, that you're going to go to social housing. That's not actually, what we want. So the things, that this design, this co-design is really important. We've been involved in 2 small projects, and some of the people here have been involved. And it was all about, in both cases, one was a 6 block of 6 one-bedroom units, and let's create this and support this for women and work out a financial model that will work. And it was a philanthropist / investor was interested in getting that working. It didn't happen, but that model is possible. And the other model, which we were involved with, and people from here, was a big property company and a housing company, and they set up a model, and it's just another model, of 5 self-contained units, a general kitchen in the middle. People wanted their privacy, but some people wanted to do. And it was also, I hate to use the word transition housing, but it was sort of, they weren't in crisis anymore, but they wanted somewhere to go where they were safe and they were comfortable. And that happened and is operating because basically building companies, put philanthropic money in it, and once those women are housed, their Centrelink, will pay the rent. So just adding to all your models, there's lots of models, but it's up to us to work out how we coordinate all the different people, the government, property developers, impact investors, the designs, the social services. It's up to us to do it. And there are big $100 million projects going on at the moment about disability accommodation. Well, why aren't we doing it for women housing? And then around the world, we do have cities, as many of you know, we do have cities in the world that don't have homeless women. So why can't we do that? And we've seen the government flip on homelessness with COVID, because they've said, before they've said, we're not going to pay for hotel rooms, and now they're paying for hotel rooms, which in the scheme of things of the outcomes for a woman's rent and property is small, and it's a great stepping stone. So why can't we get some of those new models all working?
I'm also very interested in, we talk about ageing in place, and we all talk, nobody at the moment wants to go into an aged care facility because, for all the reasons. Well, some of them are quite good.
I'm sure.
But there's also the issue is you can't see your family at the moment, the restrictions on the COVID. So there is a group which is called IRT down in Wollongong, south of Wollongong, and they are actually building like those independent living units, but it's exactly what most of the women that I talk to want. They want some privacy, they want some of their own space, they want a bit of storage, they want a bit of outside space. But there is a facility in the middle, which is like a kitchen and a lounge area. But this is like 8 units they will be building. The women who move into them, it'll be those typical aged care village, and it's subsidised to some extent. They'll be paying about $200,000 per person. Now, I'm thinking there's a lot of women out there that might have $200,000, a lot that don't, but why can't we partner up so that those that don't can actually become and join into that kind of model of housing? So there's so many good things going around. And that's just on a large campus of aged care services. There's disability housing on that campus. But yeah, why aren't we doing more of that?
So I want to open the discussion up, because I think there's lots of threads that are coming here, and I can see some people chafing at the bit to get into the discussion. And I'm looking over here as well, and some people I can't see. There's some young women, you know, in the room. You may or may not want to speak, but I'm interested in, you know, what your thoughts are around planning for the future, to own houses, or, you know, to plan for your future as you age, because you will.
Only the lucky ones.
The lucky ones, that's right. I'm not sure. I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you have anything to add to?
It's definitely like put things into perspective, because, you know, with the early release of Super, you get 10,000 last financial year and 10,000 this financial year. Myself included, and a lot of my friends were like, great, we'll get $10,000 out and we'll, you know, use it now, but there's really not that perception of there is a future that we, you know, should save for. As a young person, that's not really on my agenda, but this has really opened up, and I've like started thinking a little bit more about this issue. And before I came here, it wasn't really on my radar, thinking about, you know, my mother and the prospect of, you know, her struggling with housing, because she is a single woman in her late 50s, and my own grandmother, and it's really put things into perspective, start thinking about these things early. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So Kate, I'm sure you're champing there.
Yeah, hey, it's great that you're thinking that way. For those that have taken money out due to COVID, you know, if it's helped, for some people, it's the only thing that they had, and that was great. There has been a lot of people that have taken money out of Super. Well, there's 3.2 million people took it out as a first request, and another 1.2 people asked for a second dip. So 1.2 million have taken out 20,000. And primarily, it's been women that have been more affected by these withdrawals, because proportionally their balances were lower. They've taken out the 20,000, so their balances have been more affected. And what they haven't realised is that magical eighth wonder of the world, which is compound interest, where your $10,000 or $20,000 would turn into $100,000 to $200,000 when you retire. And that's exactly the type of figures that we're needing when we do retire. So the good news is there's lots of great advice about putting the money back in if it has come out. So you can start from $14 a week as a 20-year-old to get it back in. If you want to pay it back within 5 years, then it's more like $45 a week. So once you get back on your feet after this crisis, take those steps, contact your fund, and put in place an automatic direct debit to put you back into a really good position for after this crisis. It's been really interesting that the government offered this, and one of our industry leaders described it. The federal government just privatised social security. That is, we're now paying for our own social security as opposed to the government actually footing the bill. So it's created quite a interesting precedent. And yeah, it's quite a lot of discussion going on in the industry. But it also creates that opportunity to start these conversations. It's like, this is your money, but it is your future money. And unless it's in the investment where every day it earns money and every day those earnings earn earnings, that is the power of compound interest. And that's why we need to have it untouched for that, 40-year working life, so that you can have those great outcomes at the end. We are, as women, with all those other elements I mentioned before, we're already behind the 8 ball on getting the balances that we need to be sustained in retirement, so we don't want to be making it any worse at the moment. But there are solutions. And going to your fund is a great example. No matter who you're with, many of them offer, like QSuper, financial advice, personal financial advice over the phone. You can call them up, but you can go to the Money Smart websites. There's great advice. So my quick 5 tips would be for about your super. Treat it like your bank account. Become that familiar with it, as far as you know where your money is and you know how to log on, you can check it. Most funds have just released their annual statements and you can see how the money's gone. It was a tougher year, but super over 10 years has done really well.
Great general advice. It was very general.
Sing into the moonshine, sing into the sunshine.